Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to HIMediaTV. I'm your host, Evan from HIMediaTV, and today I want to talk to you about Diablo 4. Recently, the Lord of Hatred DLC, or for my boomer shooters in the audience, expansion was released. And me being the good little consumer, I pre-purchased the damn thing. Now, I will say that the story here is probably one of the more compelling aspects of Diablo 4, and at least in comparison to its predecessors, in my personal opinion. The actual use of cinematics, frankly, stellar voice acting and emotional whiplash is a pretty good for a game series that has historically used the story as a footnote in the game itself. Now, quick tangent, I got into Path of Exile about 2 years ago. Pretty soon after my girlfriend at the time broke up with me, and for unrelated reasons, I basically became a transient homeless man with a computer and a suitcase. It was intellectually stimulating as far as buildcraft was concerned for me to enjoy it, but brain dead enough that I could let the pretty colors just make my ADHD go burr. I had played Diablo 3 before this, and it had the arcadey nature that I loved about Diablo 3, with a level of depth that was absent. I got pretty far along in it before I had to Google a build, which frankly has been my biggest criticism of both Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. Brief interjection. The Path of Exile 2, and I'll mention this later in the show, recently had an announcement at time of recording that basically made it so they're going to have online builds available to have a progression you can follow in game, which is going to make Path of Exile 2 probably the most user-friendly ARPG on the market, and I'm really excited about this because maxroll.gg is not fucking intuitive, and I'm very excited that they are adding this, but that's just my own personal thing about it. So yeah, yippee, Grinding Gear Games continues to be on fucking top. That being said, there are brain-dead builds that are relatively easy to memorize and intuitively pick up, but because I played a Necromancer in Diablo 3, needless to say, I play the Witch in Path of Exile, and I am therefore condemned to difficult-ass ending builds and unintuitive progression. I should have been a warrior with spin to win, but alas, here we are. And while Path of Exile 2 is definitely the more approachable ARPG compared to Path of Exile 1, and I enjoy both immensely, Diablo 4 is baby's first ARPG fundamentally, and my biggest gripes with it at the end of the day was how irritating it could be to get the perfect build. That I frankly just elected to choose a suboptimal build, and unlike Diablo 3, Diablo 4 actually has some endgame content that feels somewhat meaningful, at least in comparison to doing non-stop portal runs for 800 hours. But this video isn't about the mechanics. It is about the story, and it is about the big bad primeval Diablo and stopping his evil plan. Actually, I lied. It has nothing to do with Diablo. We're actually fighting Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred, and Diablo ain't even mentioned once, making this the first Diablo game where you don't actually fight the fucker. Hell, you could do so in Diablo Immortal, that whack-ass game. I actually downloaded and played a little bit of it. It being Diablo Immortal. It was okay. It's a nice to waste 5 minutes, but other than that, it's just, I don't know, just go play Diablo 3 on a Switch or something. But I digress. The actual lore of Diablo is fairly compelling, and while I don't pretend to be an expert on it, I will say that narratively, the whole world of Sanctuary, the high heavens, and the hells is really interesting. A creation myth in which humanity is utterly reviled by the heavens they worshipped and the hells they scorn, where humanity is viewed as infinitely disposable and a mistake that should have never existed, and yet perseveres obstinately, despite the efforts of immortals over centuries attempting to end them. There is genuine effort throughout the games, both in notes and diary entries and the stories themselves, building this narrative. The culmination of everything in Diablo 3 was the establishment of our understanding on how this world came to be, the story of the Nephilim as the precursors to humanity, and the parents of which who created the realm of mankind, said parents being the principal antagonists in Diablo 4. Lilith was the mother of mankind, and Anarius the father, both of which took steps in their selfishness and disdain for each other, were liable to destroy the world they had built. And Nereus, in his jaded and cynical view of his children's descendants, long since lost any capacity for love, and Lilith, in her hatred for her banishment to the void and betrayal, becoming the monster that her son Rothman knew she was. Well, that's kind of true. I'm going to be honest with you. Lilith, to me, at least as far as my reading of the story of Diablo 4, is an anti-hero. The true big bad is Mephisto. The big problem with Lilith is all of the death and destruction that would have helped insulate, Sanctuary from the forces of hell. She was ultimately trying to save humanity, but a lot of people were fucking dying in the process. That and the fact that Nereus was so willing to let Sanctuary burn if it meant being allowed to return to the high heavens. I feel like I should get to my point. The whole reason I titled the video the way I did, and most likely the reason you clicked on it, the largest reason why ARPGs suffer narratively, I would argue, is that they were never really incentivized to grow. At least from a narrative standpoint, necessarily. That's not to say that innovations haven't been made. Obviously, the storytelling done in Diablo 4 probably has the most effort put into it of delivering any story in any ARPG in the market. Even though I would probably argue that the story of Path of Exile 1 is probably the best, even if it is delivered narratively and efficiently. The big thing is that when Diablo 1 came out, the games were hamstrung with choices that they had for narrative delivery, and the type of game that Diablo 1 was, it genuinely struggled with being able to deliver said story with limited graphical and technological aspects of the time, as well as the very nature of the game itself being top-down, kind of grainy, without a lot of detail, and focused a lot more on loot and in combat. And because Diablo 1 was the progenitor of what we consider to be the ARPG genre, what it established as the culture of said genre stuck, and because the narrative took a backseat or sideline to the mechanics and gameplay, that was what ARPG players were willing to accept at the time. So as time progressed, and video games as a medium not only had technological increases that allowed for more space, like memory-wise, for cutscenes, audible dialogue, and more numbers of narrative devices being able to be shoved in. The games themselves became larger, which allowed for more room for the narrative to be explored without sacrificing gameplay and mechanics. Games like Call of Duty are good examples of this, i.e. looking at something like Call of Duty 1, 2, 3, and then seeing the jump narratively to things like Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops 1, etc., as well as other RPGs like Morrowind into Oblivion, which is a gigantic jump, and then Oblivion into Skyrim, which is an even further jump, and many more. Fable, Warcraft, things of that nature. But then Diablo 3 hits the ground running, and for all intents and purposes, it is incrementally better narratively than its predecessors. And while within the confines of the genre, it is a gigantic leap compared to the storytelling, between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, comparing, the storytelling changes to something like Morrowind to Oblivion, it looks, outside looking in, wholly insufficient. Now, while I don't necessarily want to turn the point of this video into it being us, the consumer's fault, it's not completely, I will say the complacency of developers does come into play here. Games like Diablo and Path of Exile have unbelievably rich worlds and lore behind them, and as somebody who loves sinking his teeth into said world building because I'm autistic as fuck, I got to be honest, I wish that I could treat these RPG games as more than just silly little dopamine generators that I used to turn my brain off at the end of a workday. I think fundamentally certain aspects of the ARPG genre need to grow from a narrative standpoint. And I think a lot of these IPs have very rich features that could be explored, whether it's by overhauling how these narratives are delivered in game or even exploring through other mediums like novels. Fundamentally, I think the point I'm trying to get at here is that I yearn for a stronger push towards the art without hopefully sacrificing the mechanics, because for most people that is the bread and butter. And while the narrative of Diablo 4 is what had me by the balls and what made me buy the Lord of Hatred expansion, God knows the mechanics of Diablo 4 don't necessarily have me sticking around or itching to go back. I'm excited for the changes that they recently announced in Path of Exile 2. At time of recording, the in-game build progression based off of online builds is coming, and I'm excited for, and the ongoing Mirage League in Path of Exile 1 has started being more compelling for me since I switched to a Poison SRS build for my Witch. And while my Necromancer remains dead in the water after completing the campaign, I still believe that that Diablo 4 has the best presented narrative in recent memory for ARPGs. But while I've really only dipped my toes into the Diablo franchise and the Path of Exile franchise, please let me know in the comments if there's any other ARPGs that I've overlooked that you feel are better or at least enjoyable in innovative ways compared to the other two.